Hi, I'm Molly Barnes. Gifford Myers is one of our best, I guess one of Los Angeles' best artists, and he works in clay. He's a humorist, but he's one of the few people, along with Pete Volkas, Kenny Price, who changed the collection, the idea of clay as a utilitarian object and made it into something beautiful, and then in his case, funny. Hi, Gifford.
Hi, Molly.
Where did that big ball come from?
From a memory in my grandfather's study. He had the classic globe in the stand, and it just sort of developed from there and got larger and larger, and it was one of the many public art projects that you get into the middle of and then somehow it goes south. And I was too interested to abandon the ball, so I went ahead and made it myself and made it a freestanding piece.
Years ago there was a law passed that 1% of every public building had to be devoted to art. Public art is now very much in. Does it work, or does the artist get hurt at every instance?
I think there are even more ways to look at it than whether the artist gets hurt. But to answer your question, it's a dangerous game for artists oftentimes because if they're not careful, the piece can end up costing more than they're being given. I'm in a funny situation, having done several projects. I still, in the back of my mind, wonder if it isn't blackmail. And maybe that comes partially from a lot of work being put in public that I don't really want to look at. And people could even question their tax dollars or being involved in that.
Being used for that, yeah.
I think in certain ways the developers and cities are possibly being blackmailed into putting art in public places. On the other hand, from the artist's point of view, I think it's a great opportunity to try to do things in a larger scale and wrestle with issues of usability, in a sense.
Well, now, do you work with a curator, or do you have somebody that gets you, like an agent who gets your work into public spaces, or how do you do it?
There are several different ways. From my a small amount of knowledge that public art comes about. One is through art consultants who will be contacted by developers who are might be required by a certain city to put 1% or 0.5% into art. Then there are the city and public government agencies that are within these cities or areas that have this law. With the cities or with the public agencies, there's usually a public call for people to send in their qualifications, and then it's tightened into semifinals, and you have to do a proposal, and then a finalist is chosen.
Are you good at that?
It's really time-consuming.
Yeah.
And not art making. No, I'm getting better. I'm getting better because I'm learning.
Last weekend I was at a memorial in Palm Springs, and I stopped by a Denny's or someplace to get a hamburger, and I heard this man genuflecting behind me, and it was you. And as a result, you're here today. Do you do that kind of streperous thing to get attention, or to get, not follow the corporate line to get into places?
Well, we're getting kind of personal here, Mark.
Yeah, well.
After all, you do teach a class in trying to help artists learn how to get their work seen, and you are considered by many to be an art maven and a power. And so I guess I was just probably following one of your tenets of just trying to
kiss it up with the dealer.
To pay proper respect. No, I think, I mean, your question touches on a lot of things that are important to me. Like, I'm fed up with going to art openings and everybody has black on. I mean, what black shirt shall I wear tonight? I wear black, I'm an artist. And so I sort of make a point of never wearing black. And it's that Groucho Marx, any group that wants me, I'm not sure I want to be a part of, which is really why I got into art to begin with.
I heard Mary Boone once tell one of her artists, you're wearing the wrong outfit. You're supposed to wear black and have Don Johnson stubble and an earring. I actually heard this conversation.
Well, she just got arrested, too, so maybe we should all go get arrested.
Actually, she was let go, but she was arrested for having a gun.
It was great publicity, wasn't it?
Absolutely. How did you get started? You come from a very conservative family, as do I. They say the first generation makes the money, the second generation spends it, and the third are artists.
That's too confusing.
Well, then just skip it. How did you get started?
The generations of my family haven't come into the money yet, and I certainly am not. I think actually in high school, I'd always made things with my hands, and I made a soapbox derby and was in that national, well, I didn't make it past the first round, but I did make it, the soapbox derby. I always liked making things. And when I was a senior in high school, I stumbled into someone's house who's later became a founding director of the Museum of Contemporary Art in Los Angeles. And instead of these third-generation French prints on the wall, which I was familiar with, or just something that you never looked at twice, she had a tall lucite prism by Peter Alexander and oversized tennis shoes on the coffee table and some other wacky stuff. And I suddenly had this revelation, the light went on, that, hey, you know, you can have stuff made by live people and in your living room. You don't have to have these meaningless space takers. And from then on, I felt like there was a little validation.
That's exactly. I went to Marcia Wiseman's house once, who was a major collector, and also her brother was Norton Simon, and the house was warm, and there were wonderful, colorful things on the walls. And she wasn't there, but for the first time I saw you didn't have to be lonely in a house. Actually, the place was so vibrant and so exciting. It changed my life, too.
Well, she bought some of my work, but you know, Norton never did. You won't find my work at the Norton Simon Museum.
Have you been to the museum?
Yes, I took all my students recently. Well, I couldn't see Geary's influence on it, but that was okay because I think we've got plenty of Geary's influence. Mostly I was struck by the gardens and how they'd improved from the sterility and hard-edged long pond and made it more of a French walking garden or something.
Now, how did you get into clay?
I was in architecture at UC Berkeley, and at the end of every quarter, an architecture students still stay up all night for usually 3 nights before the end of each term. And I was up on the 9th floor, and I was looking down at the ceramics yard, and they seemed to be having a lot more fun than we were on our drawing tables. and they seemed to be smoking a lot, and they weren't cigarettes. And it looked pretty good to me. So I started, the next quarter I signed up, and I was taking so many ceramics and sculpture classes that the architecture dean called me in twice and admonished me that I was not going to graduate on time because I had too many of these frivolous art classes. But my response, I think at the time, was something like, yes, but when I do graduate, I'll be sane.
Now, were the first pieces you did, the clay pieces, were they humorous the way your work is today?
There was a bit of humor. The first piece that I really remember that I think was other than exercise in clay came about because of a student movement. I was involved in student politics and got arrested a few times at Berkeley, and there was one time that we were all encircled in Sproul Plaza and barricaded, not allowed to leave, and the helicopter came over. This was martial law that Reagan had called for in Berkeley, and the helicopter came over and gassed us all, and there was no escape. They had cordoned off the Sproul Plaza. So my response was, when we were able to leave, is I went back to the ceramic studio and I made a set of dinnerware with helicopters and gas spraying out of them, sort of commemorative dinnerware that was sort of serious humor, I thought.
Were you always a humorist in your family?
Yeah, it's a good way to get out of trouble and,
and
get out of things and to keep emotions out in a safe distance from you.
So what were some of the first things you did?
I
remember showing something that said, this is do not touch.
Well, isn't that amazing? I brought that. This was in the 1971 or 2 or something, and it came about because I went to one too many museums that had do not touch works of art signs.
I think you have to lift it up more,
Let's try to put it this way.
There it goes.
And I guess I'm just always sort of wanted to be a maverick in any case. That if someone tells me to do something, then I want to do the opposite. And I got tired. One too many signs in museums. It made me want to go up and put my thumbprint on the sign. So I made these things in porcelain with a thumbprint.
And what was the addition?
Oh, I think 10 in total, something like that.
Did anybody ever call you and say their wife or their husband had wiped off the fingerprint?
I think you may be remembering an old tale that Betty Asher, a noted art collector and art dealer and gallery owner, called me one time all upset and said that her cleaning lady had been so proud she spent a half an hour cleaning a fingerprint off of one of her pieces. What should she do? And I said, just get yourself a stamp pad and put your thumb on it, and then it will be a collaboration.
Those are very valuable today. Show us some more.
Well, I've got...
Where did this come from? What is this?
This one here is a mock-up for a public art project for the city of West Hollywood. And the project is the old Chasen's restaurant, which I started thinking about. It's not Chasen's anymore. It's going to become a high-end market, but the same architecture. And I tried to think about what Chasen's was, and it was this watering hole for, in my mind, I was picturing Orson Welles and other heroes and heroines of the black and white film era who would drop by or have dinner there or take a coffee. And did you
ever go there?
No.
They had Chasen's Chili. That was a great place. The Reagans went there.
Well, yeah. That may be related to why I didn't go. But
yeah, anyway, go on.
I just had this picture of this person having a cup of coffee and reading a book in sort of solitude, alone, a moment away from the chase and bustling of life and there. And so I did this piece, which will be cast into bronze and be on an 8-foot high pole. So ideally you'll look up and it may give you the feeling of a memory, a little bit of magic, with it being off kilter balance-wise, and the book and the saucer and cup kind of starting to slide off, and the oversized man's pocket watch, a little bit of surrealism, and with the title of A Moment in Time, which really is, maybe there's a bit of humor, there's a bit of magic, there's a lot of romance. I still think that I'm interested in romance in the act of art making.
I just love your work. Tell about some of the other things that you've done.
Well, early on, sometime about when we first met, I think, early 70s, I was doing
They've
cups.
got it on this ball again. Gifford, talk some more about that one.
Well, the ball was, there we go. Now we're on to the public. This is the piece for Chasen's restaurant, which we've just talked about.
How big is that?
It's just a normal-sized bentwood chair, which is 4 feet tall or so.
Oh, what's this?
And this piece here was a public art project, City of Pasadena, for the Senior Center, and went through all sorts of conversations with committees and things. Well, now we've jumped to an homage. I chose to make an homage to Richard Feynman, a Nobel Prize physicist who taught for 30 years at Caltech, who I slightly actually knew and was quite a character. And now we've jumped to my own self-portrait done in Italy from an image of Orfei, a famous Italian clown, and then different objects in the foreground, including the Leaning Tower of Pisa on the right. With my dumb American's solution to the problem of Pisa, you merely need a plumber's friend to suck the moisture, the water out of the ground. But it's actually titled Attrezzi di Lavoro, the tools of the trade, and objects and images and things that I've collected and made, and what I call my own self-portrait. The artist as clown, as fool, really, is what I'm more interested in the classical sense. The one who has no position in a society, but oftentimes knows many of the secrets at different levels of the society, and oftentimes can go, which I think artists have a possibility of doing, is to go between the classes, because you really have no position in any one of the classes alone. And so there's this possible flexibility, there's this idea that you hear secrets and you know things from different levels that people wouldn't convey to other people in their level.
Do you feel you can fit into any class?
No, I think I fit out
in
many classes. But I don't know, I think if you try to work with as strong a sense of yourself as possible, you can be accepted at different levels as an outsider.
There was a book by Paul Fussell, who's a well-known he studies, and he wrote a book called Class. He taught at Johns Hopkins. In fact, he's still there. And he divided the world, America, into classes: the proletariat, middle class, upper class. And he said you can always tell the upper class. They always wear the hairstyle they wore when they were in school. They always dress with something that lived. I mean, never anything synthetic. And then there's an artist class, which is what he calls the X class, and I think that's what we consider ourselves, that go sort of between classes but really don't identify with any one. There are other artists, though, that feel that they have a platform or a need to really espouse ideological or political values. You don't consider yourself in that?
No. I wrote about that to myself some 20 years ago, and one thing I sort of remember is that if I won't remember it verbatim, but I was very leery of anyone who takes any sort of a political position, because they would need to be ready to stand by and for that position in all situations, as opposed to just as fashion.
Some people consider that growing up, though. Developing positions that may be arbitrary, but they are going to stick with them unless somebody can change their mind.
That sounds pretty blind to me.
Well, that's how a lot of America operates. That's how a lot of people reach maturity, is by these hard and fast rules and ways of arguing. I think as artists we have to remain open.
Well, as artists I think we have to remain immature.
Yeah.
I mean, at least the way this seems to be coming down is that maturity is a hardening of position, and that doesn't allow for change and for growth and for new knowledge.
What do you think the value of art is?
Ooh, that's one of those penetrating, deep, singular questions. I might have to go roundabout on it, in that I've come to a position of saying that the reason I got into art is it was the one place that I could find where nobody could touch me.
That's right.
Ultimately, nobody can pass. Everyone can pass judgment, but the meaning of that judgment is only what I choose to accept it to be or to have. And in that sense, it was the ultimate position as to be a maverick, that I'm the only one who can finally be the judge of what I do.
You get in your ivory tower, your studio, and no one can touch you. You really do what you want to do. Do you find it's hard marketing yourself, though, finding galleries, finding spaces that will show your work with that kind of attitude?
I don't know whether it's that kind of attitude that...
Well, a lot of artists hate to go out and bother with the mendacity of going to art openings and kissing up to the dealers. People just don't want to bother with it, but it's unfortunately important today.
Yeah, I do a lot less of it since I've had children.
Really?
Absolutely. I could, 10 years ago I could tell you every show in town and in New York and at different galleries, and for various reasons. One is having children and having other things that take my time and my interest. Another is that maybe in my old age I'm less and less interested in what I'm seeing shown around. There's a high level of cynicism and slapdash and armchair criticism that I used to think was what really important. Was the area and the position of the graduate student, myself included, but that when you cease being a graduate student, that it was time to get in the trenches rather than to stay in the armchair.
I asked your son last week if he wanted to be an artist like his daddy, and he said he wanted to be a star of Cats, the musical.
Yeah.
And I thought that's a collaborative effort. That is not the same as being a visual artist. You have to get along with the director and the other members of the cast.
I don't know that he's only 10, just turned 11 yesterday, but
so he has
gotten to that point of thinking, but he could recite at least the major 10 or 12 musicals in the last 10 years. He absolutely loves musicals, loves costumes, loves theatrics. I don't think he's gotten to the point of considering the collaborative effort and interconnection.
Yeah, right.
He's just a consumer at the moment of it.
Is your wife an artist?
She is, yeah. She's a painter who, in the last 7 or 8 years, has gone into digital-related multimedia and runs a multimedia center at the college that she teaches at. And
which is?
Pasadena City College, and she's been instrumental in bringing in grants and developing their program and connecting with DreamWorks and Sony and Rhythm and Hues and the other sorts of industry uses of digital multimedia.
Now you're living in Italy more and more. Why is that?
The people love artists, and they don't care if they like your work. I would say that's first, is that they're incredibly welcoming, incredibly supportive. I'm going there as a stranger, a foreigner, so I have a certain sort of a position that we were talking about before as an outsider, but I do know some things, and I make a lot of work. I work incessantly when I'm there, and so I get respect and get support. And there's a lot of industry situations that are not available here. I work with a resin factory and a balloon factory and a floor tile factory. I've been working at a floor tile factory. Let's see if we can get this here.
There.
It's not bad. Right there. This is just standard floor tile that comes out of Faenza, Italy, and they export to everywhere in the world, including a lot to the United States. This would just be office floor, lobby floor. But what I do is I take the floor tiles as they're coming along the line and before they've been fired, and I pull them off the line, and I glaze them, or I cut into them, or every time I go back to each trip I have to make a new test tile to check how the glazes are working. How the glazes are working at that point.
Fantastic.
So this was just a test.
Could I buy that? No.
This is a 16 by 16 inch or so. But they're just these junky tiles that we see. But I stumbled in there one day because some fellow had listened to a lecture I gave in my broken Italian, and he asked if I'd like to see a tile factory, and my first reaction was, no. You know, they're just making these mauve tiles or whatever, fake marble. But once I saw it, I realized it was like Disneyland. I can pull these tiles off. So anyway, I asked him if I could come and work there. They'd never had that sort of situation. So I set up a studio in the middle of this half-mile-long factory. And I know all the workers, and I work all night long, and I just pull the tiles off, and I can do my changes, add my glazes, and run them through the system. And in 1 hour, the tiles go up to 2100 degrees and back down again. I can see the results in an hour.
How great.
So it's like pages in a drawing book.
Well, how do you get them back to this country? Is it difficult to ship?
No, it's actually not difficult. It's a little expensive, but I've been in a situation where they let me work for free at the tile factory. They like what I do, and I think another thing is it really costs them very little to nothing. And I entertain the workers. I make their life more interesting. And so they've shipped things back for me. They shipped the head of David back for me. I've got the head of David, 3.5 feet high, that was cast off of the real David. I couldn't figure out how to ship it back, and they said, we'll put it in one of our containers.
And where is it today?
It's in my studio.
Where is it going?
Well, it's going to become a piece with other things added to it.
Now tell us about these pieces.
Well,
or this one. This is my favorite.
Because in the 80s, I did a number of house pieces that came about. There we go. It's a 5-inch by 3-inch by 2-inch house piece that comes off the wall like that. And anyway, they have stories about them, and they're about human interest or about politics. This one here is called "She Took the House, He Got the Business." And it's an apartment house next to a little house, California ranch-style house, and it's about a nasty divorce. It's a very complicated story, but I start making the pieces, and then I start developing stories that cause me to want to continue the pieces.
Gifford, that is just beautiful.
And in some cases, I've done some paintings, maybe perhaps influenced by a friend and artist that I admire, Peter Alexander. This is a painting on black velvet, which
no artist is supposed to paint on unless it's Peter.
Or unless it's Jesus or Elvis.
Exactly.
On black velvet. But what I love about the black velvet is that the house or any object painted on it, it just floats.
That is just beautiful, and the reflection of the house.
The camera can't get any closer, but there's a day house and a night house influenced by Magritte and his Empire of Lights paintings of dusk, that magical time. And inside the day house, the night house, is actually a couple, and there's a Robert Longo on the wall. There's all sorts of little details in them. And then the house, the daytime house, has got a little barbecue on fire, and a house in the neighborhood reflected in the window of it. There's a house in the neighborhood that's on fire. In any case, I would just get very complicated and twisted in these little tiny things. This was really one of my early pieces going to Italy. I'm just playing with the difference in language and how when we learn a new language, we oftentimes learn opposite words at the same time, and we oftentimes make a confusion between those, like hot and cold, yes and no, here and there. And I have the same problem. So in this case, you got caldo on the left, which is hot, and cold, which is on the right, which is cold.
Gifford, that's all we have time for. Where can people see this work?
That's a good
You're having a show. You're having a retrospective in
Italy, of the work that I've done in Italy, but that won't be until summer of 2001.
But you're in the permanent collection of the Los Angeles County Art Museum.
Los Angeles County owns 7 or 8 pieces, and other places.
And we can see it there.
What they can call
on the 3rd floor, or they can call you. Art is not for everyone. It never has been, and it never will be. But for those of you who love it like we do, we want to turn you on. I'm Molly Barnes.